Welcome to Talking Insights. I'm your host António, and today we have a very special guest, Pravin Shekar, one of the most recognizable faces in market research, known not just for his innovative thinking, but also for having one of the best mustaches, smiles, and laughs in the business. He really fills the room. Pravin's reputation as a rogue marketer reflects a career built on bold moves, creativity, and pushing boundaries. From launching Crea to leading inspiring talks around the globe, is someone you definitely will remember. So thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much, Pravin, for being here. Today we have a very special guest, Pravin Shekar, one of the most recognizable faces in market research. My first question is, what first drew you to market research, and how did you start it? Why market research? How did it start it for you?
Oh, lovely. So, market research, I started my career as a part-time field interviewer, Antonio. This was in 1993. And I got a job to do 40 interviews a day, and it was only face-to-face those days. My target for the day, and my supervisor would give it to me, and I used to cycle house to house in that particular area, conduct the 40 interviews. Do you know how much I was paid at that point? I was paid the equivalent of 50 cents
Oh wow.
that day per day, but it was handsome money because India was a different India at that particular point, Antonio. That was my start as a field interviewer. The following year, again during my summers, I did it for the levers. So by the time Dun and Bradstreet, which at that point owned AC Nielsen and IMS Health, which is now IQVIA, came calling for a campus recruitment, I was right up in center, having executed a few projects live, having certificates for data collection. So that's how I started my career.
That's great. And for my understanding and I did a bit research on your career and what you've done. You always had led the breakthrough through like rogue decisions. The unexpected routes that you take. Can you share a moment that those decisions led to a breakthrough in the industry or in the company
Oh,
that you were dealing?
happy to. Um, I turned an entrepreneur very, very early, and not just an entrepreneur, Antonio, a parallel entrepreneur, which gives you the option to continue your experiments. And one such experiment was in the year 2000, launching an online panel in India, which, in my opinion, in the Indian market research or the tech industry, would have been the first company to be born, stillborn. I was way, way, way ahead of the curve to start something specific to the Indian market. And so it had to be shelved. But I kept talking about it, attending conferences, the Esomar, mobile guidelines, online guidelines, etc., that my wife at one point said, either stop talking about it or do something about it, which is why after 8 years, another avatar came in, which is now one of India's leading health access bases called Kriya, which is one of my companies. So that was one. The second aspect, if you look at, is continuing to evangelize. A lot of companies want to come to India, Antonio, but they keep making the same mistake that I worked with somebody, but it didn't work out. So, on behalf of the Market Research Society of India as well as Esomar, I'm one of the evangelists going to town saying work with trusted partners, work with partners who are members of research associations who subscribe to the ICC Code of Conduct. Don't just go by the price. And you might say, what's so innovative about it? Suo moto is the innovation that I took it upon myself to go ahead to the market and say, don't just work with any company, because then you come back and saying I worked and it didn't kind of work out. That maligns the entire industry or the entire country, which is not so true. So I gave you a couple of examples, one from an entrepreneur perspective, one of course from an industry evangelism perspective, Antonio.
That's great. I mean, it's fascinating. And you also have a cheese company, right? How did that come to mind?
Uh, so, in the research sector, I've got a couple of different entities. One is into the healthcare research area, and the another one is something we started about 14 years ago called Can Do, by and for, where we skill people with disabilities. And this is the team of visually challenged, hearing impaired, and wheelchair bound that built our entire panel. Because in India, it's not just enough to send you an email. We have to call, double check, triple check, get the IDs, get the KYC, know your customer, know your part, and that entire thing for years and continues to be built. And we used to recruit from non-profits, train them on research, on data collection, on the code of conduct, etc. But the non-profits turned around after a few years and said, you are only picking people who know English, you're only picking graduates. And at that particular point, we also had a kitchen test facility, a full-fledged kitchen that we could use. We were using for market research. So then we did a pivot and said, okay, what jobs can we provide for people who don't have an education, who cannot speak the English language? And therefore, it started off with experimenting as a cheese company, just starting and incubating a division until the financial auditors questioned, saying, what are you doing as a research company buying 100 liters of milk a day? After the incubation was a success, we hived it off as a cheese company, and those innovations continue. I continue to invest outside the research sector. The other one is a beeswax product company that's going to come up by and for people with spinal cord disabilities. And Antonio, I firmly believe that the more you venture slightly outside the research network and the insights network, it all comes right back into our own industry.
It is, yeah, it is indeed. Like you can, I always say that you can get knowledge from every corner of life, and
absolutely
that applies to business, that applies to market research, applies to everything.
Yes.
If you push the boundaries enough, there's something that you can learn there. And
yes.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, you do push creative boundaries. And my question is, how do you keep balancing pushing those creative boundaries while sticking to industry guidelines? Because you mentioned the ICC code, the Esomar ICC International Code. How do you do it?
For one, I believe there is no gray. There's either black or white, especially when you look at translating the guidelines. It's a letter and spirit. But in terms of experimenting, there's so much more to be done. And I'm hoping in the next few months to come out with a list of unintended consequences of research. So what do we do as researchers in the inside industry? People come, the marketers or the R&D team comes to us with questions. We provide answers. We provide a direction based on which they go ahead and develop a product. And then we find out that the product is being used for a completely different consequence than what it was aimed for. So from a creative perspective, I'm on a quest talking to several researchers across the globe to find out some such examples. For example, in a particular period, time period, a season in India, Antonio, the sale of black paint increases. And
Really?
Nobody was able to figure out how. And when proper research was done, that is the buffalo selling season in the north part of India, when buffaloes are sold in bulk. And so the paint is used to cover up old buffaloes. From a distance, it looks black, but some also paint it because it's a mosquito repellent and they want the buffaloes to be helpful. So come on, what did we design the product for? How is it being used for? Is also well within our boundaries in terms of finding out what is going on. And it's not just restricted to India. Some are urban legends, but some the market needs to know to find out what I call the Jugaad initiative. And that's something that a lot of people coming into India, Antonio, need to know that we folks here are extremely creative. You develop it for something, we'll do it for something else. But why stop? I write books, I've published a music album, there's a poetry podcast I have. But it's not just me. If you take John Pullister and I have a commonality that both of us love shooting drainage covers. Matt Dussig, another researcher, is a full-time fine art photographer. So our industry has scope for all of it, but we will need to ensure that we keep that creative spark alive. And even within our industry, Antonio, there's no straight way. You will get stopped by mountains, but you need to find a way, the Jugaad way, to get your research done, to get the data collected, analyzed, and sent back.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I imagine that the evolution of technology and the new trends in technology always help out that. And my next question would be kind of about it, like how, and especially in the Asia Pacific market, the market is always buzzing with these new trends, these new technologies, these new things to do. And as you said, like sometimes you can use it to do something else. Like you can use a pen to not cook, do something else with it. Um, how? What are some of the more unconventional methods that you think could really take off here in the coming years?
Right. See, the one thing about Asia Pacific here, and of course, I'm talking with my base of India, is we are experts in technology leapfrogging. So when I started my career, my house did not have a single phone, leave alone any kind of a thing. But today, every person you look at has one, sometimes two. So there is going to be a significant amount of leapfrogging. One, two. The inertia is extremely high in Asia. This is not the US when you try out newer things at the drop of a hat. And therefore, people need to realize the cultural diversity that is there that we would need to. So, one is tech leapfrogging, that is a given. Why am I talking about it? That and inertia, Antonio, that everybody, I mean, they know India and China from an APAC perspective are the biggest behemoths here. This is where the youngest population is, especially for India. And when you look at the rest of Asia, they're not far behind. The whole of us is where the future lies. So if you try to bring in something new, the adoption is going to take some time, which means you will have to invest a little bit more time in education selling. I can give you an example from online research. Wow, so many questions came in. What about representativeness? How do you know it's the right person asking, etc., etc.? The same questions, similar questions were asked for Cathy when telephone interviewing was there. The same questions are asked again now when synthetic data is into play, which I call the three-factor entry. The first time we hear, oh, it will not work, nonsense. The second time we hear, it may work, but it's not for me, not for my company. And the third time, I always knew it was a game changer. Sign me up. How do I get on? By which time half the world has moved on with that anyway. Right?
What you were saying was really interesting. I was thinking about how this whole conversation about AI and like how the large language models are working. And I always keep in mind like how those things work in different languages and in different cultures. Because one thing is like to use ChatGPT or any other of the others in English, but how do they adapt when you turn it into different languages and even within a country, the different dialects? That's yeah. Um,
So, Antonio, there are companies that are working, factoring in the cultural diversity. Not English, of course, is per se the most easier aspect for anybody to look at. But if you take someone like India, a country like India, where you have the formal sector and the informal sector, and the informal sector contributes close to 85% of the workforce. So, therefore, if you're looking for adoption there, then language is a key aspect. And two, more than the language, it's also, I live in a state of Tamil Nadu. Every 100 kilometers, the dialect changes the words. Um, it's difficult for me or my kids to understand, hey, what exactly are they talking? It's the same language,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So there are three, four really large companies that are focused and have been focused on building the Indian LLMs, not just a simple translation, but also capturing the dialects at a local level. There's an offshoot from Microsoft, which is no longer a part of Microsoft, but that's doing this. There is Kritrim, India's own AI LLM base that they are working on. So a lot of work is happening, but a lot of work is also happening in the SLMs. The whole world is after LLMs. Well, in India, it's the SLMs that are going to rule the roost. So you're not talking about millions of tons of data, but what is necessary here, given the universe for that particular market, SLMs are going to rule the roost. That's my take, and that's my bet as an investor.
Do you think those technologies or these innovations that you are mentioning, especially in India, will help preserve some of the dialects and some of the languages?
Without a doubt, because the way it is being captured is through voice capture, through accent capture, and that is being stored. Think of it like a seed bank that you can always go back to. So, in a way, this is good because a lot of cultures, languages, dialects have been vanishing over the years. So, I would take a positive look that a brilliant question from your side, Antonio, that this is the dialect bank or the accent bank, that we don't lose it ever.
It is, yeah. It's exciting. Honestly, it's really exciting times because even in English, like the different nuances of each language of each country, you can really tell. So I imagine, like within a country, to keep and preserving those dialects, it's also
Yes,
really interesting.
yes.
Um,
Uh, but in continuation to it is another insight snippet I'd like to share specific to India. A bunch of us in the lighter vein have been propagating ban the three as a movement to ban the three in India. What do I mean ban the three? Culturally, and I'm generalizing here, culturally, we don't want like to give the extremes. So I will not say you're brilliant, I will not say you're the worst. I'll put it somewhere in the middle. So if I ban the three, which is where the most of the things will come in, I'm forcing my respondent to take a side, either on the positive or the negative for me to look at. And the second aspect is related to the first one, that people do not like to criticize openly. Forget what you're seeing on Twitter. I'm talking from a research perspective. And most people try not to say no because saying no is a bit considered rude. So we will need to be aware of these aspects. When you say technology, I'm going back to research design, to questionnaire design, that we have to factor all of these in. And therefore, the tech also needs to factor or weight this in when we come into the insight creation part.
that's a really good insight. Yeah, I never thought about it. If you could give an advice, especially to the young professionals entering the field today, and particularly in India and Asia Pacific, what would that advice be?
Good. I'm going to use a cricketing analogy. And in cricket, when you play, the people who bat are called batters, and there's always two ends, and they keep crossing over. Keep one end strong and fixed and experiment with the other end, is what I say. So if you are a younger researcher, go deep, build a strength in one particular aspect as you continue to experiment with the other, because at any point you have your control to come back to. Why do I say it? In today's world, with so much change happening, it is the younger generation that is going to spearhead this particular change. But you will find people up there who are traditional, who are set in their ways, opposing or being a phenomenal bulwark for your growth and career. Don't let it get frustrated, which is why I say prove yourself in one aspect that you are extremely good in this, and then experiment and show and tell, prove it out, bring it in, be ready for the longer haul, but realize that research and insights is as sexy and glamorous as it is. Where you play with data, you play with narratives, you play with how do I tell story from this data, what stories can I tell, how do I meet the research objectives. So look at it from that aspect. My only request is play, experiment, but be number one in one aspect, whichever one that you are picking in, that enables you to be considered a whole lot of success. Now, the example I give is who was Picasso in his first few years? Picasso, once he became Picasso, he could have built a tractor and people would have lined up to buy it. So become a specialist in one, continue to experiment, show and tell, show and tell, show and tell. Don't just throw ideas, build a proof of concept, showcase it.
Yeah, and if I might add, uh, show to the things and be interested in the industry and what everyone's doing. We have Esomar has an event in Bangkok in the coming, and it's called Ignite. It's the Esomar Asia Pacific event. I'm sure that you've been to a bunch of those. Like I've seen you in pretty much all of the Esomar events so far. You're always a staple there. What I don't know if you ever looked into the program of this year's event, and if so, do you have any recommendation for like a thing that people need to see there?
Okay, so I would take a step back. Why do people need to come to conferences? It is to get inspired. There is so much more that happens in each of these conferences that we will necessarily need to. I come in for osmosis. Now, you may be surprised. What do I mean by osmosis? It is interacting with fellow people and sharing of that knowledge that you get through. One, two, for specific networking. Of course, you come to network, you can't meet the entire aspect all the time. But when you know what you want from a conference, you come in prepared. And then you come and ask, hey, I want to attend this paper, or I want to connect with so and so and so. And there will be a lot more people who will be happy to go ahead and connect you out. And three, what's happening in the world today? It's not just general talk, but you can listen to the paper, to the presentation that they have sometimes with the clients. One of the papers that struck me very, very hard was years ago at an Esomar conference. Zappi and Coca-Cola spoke about all the mess ups that they did, including a rift in the relationship and how they repaired and brought it back together, which I feel is bringing it out there, showing our vulnerability because, hey, everything is not going to come through. But coming to the specifics at the Bangkok conference, depth of the shopper marketing funnel is something that jumps out at me. I would really want to know what are the changes because the research industry is a means to an end. We work with the marketing team, with the leadership team, with the R&D team, providing answers, providing specific data on which we take our decisions. So when somebody comes up and says, hey, this is going to happen, of course, it's a prediction. It may or may not happen, but we need to be ready for it. Right? And that's exactly what an Esomar conference brings, and even more so Asia Pacific, because there is a closer cultural connection between the countries in Asia Pacific than when you just take somebody from the US. So when we have meetings, we each share what's happening in our country, what's new in your country, how can we learn from you, what can you share from us, and we take it back. So every time I come out of this conference, my head is buzzing, my notes are full with what do I need to do, what do I need to experiment with, whom do I need to connect with, what can I do to come through, right? And the status of this is it's always a competition. Should I attend a paper? Should I have a separate side-on meeting? But the APAC conference per se allows for everything with the evening plan and the welcome reception and a whole lot. Those are some aspects that definitely will pull me in. But for me, APAC has been the staple that brings together a lot of countries locally and gives me an avenue to learn firsthand and also to share what's happening and form partnerships.
That's great. And that's why we do it, honestly. It's to inspire the industry and to bring people close together so they can share and learn with each other. That's why we do it. Well, thank you so much for this. It was really, really interesting. I always say this. We are like, I have like a specific time to do this interviews, and it always exceeds. But yours was really interesting. I always have fun listen to all your talks, and thank you so much for being here. Honestly.
Oh, my pleasure, António. It was lovely conversing with you, and all the very best.
Thank you very much for you too, for you as well. And that's all for today. Again, a big thank you to Pravin for being the absolute legend that he is and taking the time for coming to the show. As we mentioned in the conversation, the next Esomar conference is just around the corner, and this time we're arriving in Bangkok for the Ignite conference. As we mentioned in the conversation, the next Esomar event is just around the corner, and this time we're arriving in Bangkok for the Ignite conference. Expect it to be 3 full days of learning and networking and a whole lot of fun. If you're on your way to Bangkok, I'll see you around, and I hope you have so much fun. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to Talking Insights. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.